My name is Nicholas Dyerly, and I'm currently serving as the 3rd Brigade SX2 in the U.S. Army.
Okay, so that I don't think anybody has any idea what that means. You're an officer, probably?
Yeah, so I'm a military intelligence officer that works on a brigade staff right now.
Ah, okay. So how did you get from BYU Idaho political science to where you're at now? Because was this your plan?
So initially, I was interested in doing something with security services, especially involved in intelligence. Initially, I was interested in the Air Force, but after taking a 2 years master's degree in Russia, I decided that the Army was a better path for my interests. And so I taught at BYU Idaho on the adjunct faculty, which was a great experience. And then I joined the military after that in the Army. I served for about 4 years as an infantry officer, and then I've recently transitioned over to being a military intelligence officer.
Wow. So I know people who don't know the military well won't know like what an insane path that is that you decided to take. Let's talk first about
Fair enough.
graduate school. What motivated you to go to graduate school and then graduate school in Russia of all places?
So I knew I wanted to study security affairs because I took a class from Brother Carter, and I'd really fallen in love with comparative politics. I thought that that was just such a unique and interesting field of study. And so I remember pulling him aside after one of my classes and asking, what can I continue to do with this? And he said, well, you can do business or you can do security. And I had always been really interested in security, especially military and intelligence type of work. And so I said, well, that if I can do that, I'm going to try to do that. And through knowing the professors in the faculty, I worked as a TA for Brother Lamoureux, and I remember we were going to present in St. Louis at, I think it was the Slavic State Conferences or something like that. And he had asked me, he said, well, what are you planning to do after this? And I said, well, I'd like to go to grad school. I've been looking at a couple programs. And he said, well, why don't you apply if you want to do Russian or Eastern European security, why don't you apply for this university in Russia? It's a really good school. It's kind of what they consider their Harvard program. You should try it. And so I applied, and it was a foreign language program, so it was specifically for English speakers, with about 40% of it was in Russian and about 60 was in English. I think it was one of their ways of reaching out for soft power and trying to build their influence academically. And so I applied to the school, and I was lucky and got in. And so I was able to go there for 2 years, continued to study the language. I graduated from there, and that's when I came back. But that's kind of what got me interested in the grad school in Russia in the first place, because I wanted to understand how they saw security problems on the international level, especially on the systems level, as opposed to how Westerners think or perceive Russian policymakers and their actions and behaviors.
So did it help you with your language training?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Living in Russia for 2 years as somebody who did not serve a mission speaking Russian was really big for me. It helped solidify especially the, uh, the accent, the language, and the vocabulary, which is something that I'm still working on with my wife today. You know, she's a native speaker, but it's definitely helped. It was a big deal for me.
So would you like speak Russian in your home and stuff when you were living there?
Yes, we would speak Russian. We still speak Russian in the house, not nearly as much as we did when we lived there, but it was a big deal speaking in the house and also just being able to go around Moscow or around Russia in general or Eastern Europe and be able to communicate in a language and practice. And most people there were really kind when I was learning too, which was a big deal.
So did knowing Russian help you when you decided to join the army?
Funny enough, not really. So when I went into the recruiting office and they found out that I spoke Russian, they initially offered me, a bunch of money with a signing bonus, and they wanted to enlist me, so to go on the enlisted side of the house. I was not interested in the enlisted side of the house just because my dad, when I was growing up, said, "Well, if you want to do the army or the military, just go the officer route. Your lifestyle will be better." And while I think that the enlisted side is a good path for a lot of people, it has been good for me and my family to be on the commission side of the house, on the officer side. So So they didn't really care as much that I spoke Russian on the officer side of the house. It has helped me in my work because I was in Germany for about 3 to 4 years, and at that time, it was right around when Russia invaded Ukraine, and so it was a big deal because we were training Ukrainians coming through, and so I was able to help on the backside and also on the translation side to actually do some of that military side of the translation work, which was very rewarding in my opinion.
So did coming into the military with a master's degree help you get in the officer ranks?
It made my prospects better from initially going in because the way that I did it was through the OCS route, which is the officer commissioning school. And so the way that that works is that you enlist, you go to basic, and then after basic, you go to OCS, where you commission after that, and then you go to a branch, and that's when you get qualified as branch qualified. And so for me, the initial coming in, it was a big deal because my board, which they run about every 6 months, was very competitive. I think there were about 150 applicants, and they only took about, I think, 30 of us. So, having a master's degree definitely gave me a leg up when it came to the initial coming in, especially with the cohort that I was competing against.
So if you had not made it as part of that 100, if you weren't one of those 30, would you have just had to stay on the enlisted side?
No, so we don't actually sign contracts until they actually say, "Yes, you're a candidate." For me, it wasn't that way. I could have gone enlisted after that, but for me, the next poker in the fire would have been, doing a PhD would be the next step. That was my second my second option there.
Okay, and so now I would imagine you're not doing infantry, and based on what you said, are you now doing the security studies you wanted to do as a part of the military?
So my path is leading me that way right now, and that was always the plan. Initially, I wanted infantry because I like doing outdoor stuff. I like sleeping in the rain. I enjoy, the infantry lifestyle that it's funny because in the military we say a lot of people like the infantry until you have to do infantry things. I was the opposite. I didn't like the management side quite as much of the infantry until we went to the field where, you're getting rained on and you're walking around with heavy loads and stuff. I really liked that part of the infantry. But what has happened now is I was branch detailed, which means I was given more or less to the infantry for about 4 years as a lieutenant. And then I was pulled into my control branch, which is military intelligence. I've done the military intelligence captain's career course now. And so now as a captain, my plan is to be applying for what's called the ACS. It's Army, I think it's civilian school program. And so they'll actually pay for me to go to school for a couple years, and then after that, I'll have an additional duty service obligation, an ADSO is what they call it, and my plan is to teach at West Point for a couple years and then move on from there.
Yeah. When you do intelligence in the army or security, you get access to information most people don't get access to. So that can make it more fun to study on the military side than on the civilian side.
Yes, that is true. In fact, it's interesting because you gotta be really careful with that because we have access to certain systems that just allow us better understanding of the operational environment is what we would call it, and you have to be very careful with delineating between what you know on the outside and what's on the high side. And so, yeah, there's a lot of information out there that you can get access to as long as you go through those security background checks and you're accessing systems that you use on a daily basis.
Yeah. So knowing now, that, like if you were to look back in the past and say, okay, this is the path you're going to take, would you have done something different at BYU Idaho? Would you maybe have tried like ROTC, or would you have done different classes or anything like that?
I would not have. And the reason why I say that is because ROTC is just a different commissioning source. And so there are advantages to ROTC, which is you get into the military a little bit quicker once you're done with that 4 year program. But I would not have been able to do a master's degree the way that I did it. Or there are paths to doing that, but I would have to trade other things. So some guys who come in initially from ROTC they're granted a very rare opportunity where they can go do a master's degree initially, but on the backside of that, they can't use military funding for continuing education in the future. And so for me, it was very important to preserve that PhD route. And the school I went to in Russia was incredibly inexpensive for what I was actually getting. And so I kind of lucked out on that sense. And just the classes that I took really gave me a solid foundation to understanding some of the more advanced concepts behind international relations theory and also security studies in general.
So, what advice would you give to students who are thinking about military as a career? First of all, I think a lot of people don't know all of the various options there are. There are so many different things you can do, but it's like a very good field for people who've got a degree in political science. Like, what would you tell them if they're thinking about that as a career?
What I would say is that the military is it's a double-edged sword. There are a lot of opportunities and there are a lot of frustrating things about it as well. The size of the military and just the bureaucratic structure that it has can be very frustrating compared to working on the civilian side, which is a little bit more streamlined. But if you're willing to suffer a little bit, if you're willing to sacrifice a little bit, the army can be or the military can be a great opportunity for actually leveraging interests that you have or for the research you want to do or even just make it a career because for me, the number one reason why I've stayed in the military is because I feel like it has a meaningful output. It does something that I feel is very important to my family and to my country, and that's very important to me. The other stuff career-wise that come along with it, I feel is a little bit secondary, but it's good to have, I think, that leverage to kinda get what you want. There are just a ton of opportunities depending on what you actually want to do.
Yeah. So I think that there are a lot of students who love either international relations or comparative politics, and they find themselves in Rexburg, Idaho, and they say, "How in the world do I get out of here and have an international life?" Right. So some people they'll choose the State Department, Foreign Service, because that allows them to sort of see the world in that way. Is military a viable option to kind of get out of the states and live a more international life, or is it not for sure that that would work out?
So for me, my experience has been yes, it has, because I served in Germany. I was stationed there at the infantry maneuver unit. The posts outside of the United States are opportunities. They're a little bit more competitive to get if you really want them. And the lifestyle that you lead while you're there is a little bit different than you would be, I think, in some of the other departments, the service departments. So for me, living in Germany, I primarily worked with English speakers. I didn't really have a lot of exposure to the German language, partially because I was really busy, because the military is a very busy lifestyle. Also because I had kids, we didn't do as much traveling as some of my younger cohorts without children. So there are just trade-offs there. It was a great experience living over there. In fact, my girls ask me frequently when we're going to go back. And, we're gonna try to go overseas again, probably when after after the PhD route is kind of completed. That's kind of our goal right now. But
Is
it
it
does offer you opportunities.
is it easier in the Air Force to go overseas than it is in the Army or the Marines or the Navy?
I'm not sure. Each branch of service has advantages and disadvantages, and I can't completely speak to the other branches of service just because I don't have a lot of experience working with them. I know with the Navy, there's a high probability of you you having international experiences because you're on a boat in the ocean, right? It happens. Same thing with the Marines. I know they're a much smaller branch. They're a little bit more condensed. With the Air Force, I feel like it's kind of a 50-50 because they have quite a few overseas locations, but they have a ton of airfields just scattered throughout the United States, like, in the plains, you know? They're everywhere. So, I'm not sure to be completely honest what the other branches of service are like when it comes to foreign service, but most Air Force guys that I know, they've lived overseas once or twice.
Mhm. So, any other advice you would give students at BYU Idaho about what to do with their time at BYU Idaho, or I don't know, just advice in general?
I think my advice would be to just enjoy the process. I think one of the things that I miss quite a bit about BYU Idaho is just going through the major classes and learning something unique every time I went to a class, especially with the poli sci department. I just felt like it was just a space where I was continually learning interesting things. And so I know that some students, they kind of get caught in the first 2 years where they're doing a bunch of foundation classes, where they're taking things that they might not be particularly interested in. But once they get into the major classes, things start really becoming interesting and curious, right? Because that's what their focus and interest really relies in. So for me, once I got over that 2 year hump at the very beginning and actually started diving into the major classes, that process was just really enjoyable throughout the department. And also, I can't I tell people all the time, like, I lucked out going to BYU Idaho just because I knew my professors personally. That opened up a lot of doors and opportunities. I know I'd asked you when I was taking your stats class, "Hey, are you doing research?" And you said, "Well, I'm not doing anything right now, but Brother Lamro is." And that just opened up me. I never thought about going to school in Russia, but because I had been in association with and worked with Brother Lamro, that opened up a ton of doors. And it's kind of it's been a revolving door of opportunities because of just the interactions of the through the process of going through the poli sci department. So it was a big deal to me, and I really enjoyed my time out there. So,
Awesome. Nick, that's great. Is there anything else you want to say? Anything else you want to share?
I mean, I don't think so. Besides the fact that
Yeah, that's fine.
I just am very thankful for the opportunities that I've gotten going to BYU Idaho. And most people when they ask about it, it is funny because the most people, they just think that BYU Idaho is just BYU Provo, and so they're like, "Oh, you must really like the football team, and BYU's great." I know some people from Utah, and I just kinda most of the time, I just kinda go, "Yeah, okay," I'm not gonna argue with you, but it really gave me just great opportunities, and I had a blast out there. Katrina and I both my wife and I had a really good time, so
That's awesome. Nick, thanks so much. I'm going to stop recording right now.
thank you very much.